Hi, everyone, and bienvenidos. On today's podcast, we're going to talk with Tania Silva Meléndez and Tamara Trinidad-González, birth workers and evidence-based birth instructors, about giving birth and midwifery care in Puerto Rico.
Welcome to the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast. My name is Rebecca Decker, and I'm a nurse with my PhD and the founder of Evidence-Based Birth. Join me each week as we work together to get evidence-based information into the hands of families and professionals around the world. As a reminder, this information is not medical advice. See evbirth.com/disclaimer for more details.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Decker, pronouns she, her, and I will be your host for today's episode. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that we will mention obstetric violence. If there are any other content or trigger warnings, they will be detailed in the show notes for this episode. And now I'd like to introduce our honored guest. Tania Silva Meléndez, pronouns she, her, is a certified birth, postpartum, and abortion doula, serving families in Puerto Rico since 2009. She's also a certified childbirth educator and breastfeeding, chestfeeding education, and counselor. Tania supports all kinds of families with evidence-based information, empathy, and respect. She hosts supports groups, teaches breastfeeding and chest-feeding classes and childbirth classes to expectant parents and birth professionals, both in her private practice and in the organization she works with. She is general coordinator of the team of Caderamen, a nonprofit community-based organization that works towards reducing inequalities in reproductive care, and she also supports Alimentación Segura Infantil, a community-based organization born after the impacts of Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017 to support breastfeeding and chest-feeding families in their lactation journeys, help them relactate their children when needed. Tania is also a human rights activist and advocate in her community and part of the Observatorio de Violencia Obstétrica in Puerto Rico and Las Mingas de Aborto, an abortion doula collective that offers free support in Puerto Rico. Tamara Trinidad-González, pronouns she, her, is a community partera/midwife, perinatal educator, and herbalist, born and raised in Puerto Rico. Tamara is a mother of 2 children who were born at home with midwives and has been actively involved in birth work for 10 years. She holds a Master of Science in Midwifery with foundations in botanical medicine from Bastyr University and is a certified professional midwife. Her midwifery and herbal practice is called Semilla Creciente Midwifery and Herbalism. Tamara is currently the president of the Puerto Rico Midwifery Association and part of the board of the National Association for Certified Professional Midwives, and she's very committed to educational, equity, and political aspects of the midwifery profession. As a professional in her community, Tamara is passionate about building connections and collaborations between midwives and other health professionals in Puerto Rico, with the hope that with these better relationships and communication can build smooth transfers when needed, with the goal of facilitating the best care possible for families giving birth in Puerto Rico. Both Tania and Tamara became evidence-based birth instructors in 2021. I'm so thrilled that both Tania and Tamara are here. Welcome and bienvenidas to the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast.
Thank you. We're also very thrilled.
Yes, very honored to be here finally in this space. Thank you. Yeah, and I so enjoyed meeting you both in Puerto Rico this January. It was the highlight of my year so far. And I am just so excited that our listeners get a chance to hear from you. Can you talk with our listeners about what inspired each of you to go into birth work in the first place?
Okay, I'll start. This is Tania. When my husband and I realized that we were ready to have a baby and we wanted to quit birth control, we started researching a little bit about birth and we started getting educated. So I crossed with the documentary, The Business of Being Born, and I confirmed what I suspected, that I didn't want to give birth in a hospital. So I started searching for midwives in Puerto Rico. And I remember a friend of my brother that gave birth at home. So I called her and she gave me information about midwives in Puerto Rico. That was around November, December. And on December, there was photographic exposition of home birth photography that coincided with the inauguration of Centro Mom, which is a community-based organization that supports reproductive processes of women, mostly birth, and with midwives and doulas and all that stuff. And that December, there was going to be a doula certification. So I said, I'm going to do this for myself and maybe to help my friend. And in the past, I felt the calling. I just recently finished 2 master's degrees in business and international business. Has nothing to do with birth, but that's how I entered this world. Then I became a childbirth educator, and then I became a mother and a breastfeeding, chestfeeding educator afterwards.
Yeah. And how many years have you been in birth work then, Tania?
I certificated in 2009, so it's been almost 14 years.
Wow. 13 or 14 years. That's amazing. And Tamara, how about you? How did you get into midwifery and becoming a partera?
Well, right before my first pregnancy, around 2010, 2011, I was already trying to see what I wanted to do for grads. I had a bachelor's degree in biology, and I was working in conservation, environmental conservation and education. But I was able to go to Honduras on a journey, and I was able to see medical professionals. I didn't know any skills, taking vitals or anything, but I was able to support the team and coordinating volunteers. Right after that trip, I started thinking, I think I really want to try to consider pursuing something related to health. I wasn't sure if it was going to medical school, which a lot of my classmates in the bachelor's degree were doing, or public health. So I think everything is just connected because midwifery is public health, right? But then I became pregnant, and then the journey started of me looking for options and realizing that there were not a lot of options and that finding a midwife was kind of a challenge. Back then, there were only 3 direct entry midwives, but I was happy that I connected with one of them because I actually thought it was an extinct profession. And my father was born at home with midwives, so it wasn't too far away from me in terms of history and connecting with those realities and those options. But then if I wanted to do that, I needed an OB that was willing to respect my option of midwifery care in a parallel way and respect my option of doing a home birth. So for that, I had to travel 2 hours back and forth, each way for each appointment, because I didn't live close to that doctor. And then the long story short, after I finally was able to have my respected process at home during the birth, in the midst of all the oxytocin high, I was also kind of in shock and all the images of the process and my midwife right there confirming health, being so respectful, so calm, and letting me be. I remember that I just felt a message right in my heart saying, this should be accessible for everyone. It shouldn't be so hard. I was determined. I had a good work. I had education that allowed me to do research, but it wasn't accessible at all. I think that seed kept growing because at first I was I'm just in an oxytocin high, of course. But then a year after, I saw a doula course and I registered on it and I did it and became a doula. Then 2 years after that, I saw the perinatal educator course, but midwifery calling was always there. And I started getting to know all the midwifery community and seeing it grow, see more students that were already coursing, graduating and beginning their practices. And 5 years after I gave birth to my first child is when I was able to start midwifery school. And yes, here I am around 12 years later, a midwife in Puerto Rico, and there's even more midwives. And it's very exciting to see the community grow and the options grow.
So when you had your first baby at home, you said there were 3 midwives doing home births in Puerto Rico.
There were 3 direct entry midwives. There were also some nurse midwives as well that were also doing home birth, but I didn't know that in that moment.
So about a handful. of midwives and nurse midwives. And do you know how many there are now on the island?
Yes, there's now 16 direct entry midwives. 14 of us are CPMs. There's 12 students in different schools for direct entry midwifery programs, and there's about 13 nurse midwives.
Wow.
I'm not sure how many of them are currently in practice, but there's also many of them, like probably half of them are in practice.
So you were living through, hopefully, a rejuvenation of midwifery in Puerto Rico. You're seeing it happen.
Yeah, we're seeing it all 3D.
I know that's encouraging news, but I also have learned from you that the birth environment for families and birth workers can be very difficult and challenging. Can you talk to us about birth in Puerto Rico? Like, what is the birth rate? How easy is it to access care from an obstetrician or midwife? And what's the culture of birth there in the hospitals?
Okay, so this is Tania again. This is like a summary of the birth scenery in Puerto Rico. When I started doulaing, around 42,000 babies were born each year. Today, there's been a significant decrease. Around 19,000 babies are being born every year.
So your birth rate has been decreased by half.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And it has to do with migration because of the economic crisis in Puerto Rico and all the disasters, the hurricanes, the earthquakes, the government, the imposition of the Junta de Control Fiscal. I think we're going to talk about that, the colonial stuff in Puerto Rico, the panorama Puerto Rico. And also because of Zika. When Zika was happening, the Zika virus.
Oh, the Zika virus, yes. Mm-hmm.
There was a big campaign on birth control. So the government was offering free birth control, long-term birth control with intrauterine devices being inserted for free for women and pregnant people. So that also affected natality in Puerto Rico. Besides the natality being dropped, in terms of outcomes, we have a very high cesarean rate, one of the highest in the world and in the United States. And I'm talking about the United context because we're a colony of the United States. So in 2021, we had 49.6% of cesarean rate.
So one half.
It means like that since I started doing birth work around the 40-somethings, 46, 47, 46, 48, 49. There's a very low rate of VBAC, around 1%. There's a very high prematurity rate and low birth rate. Both in 2021 were 12%, one of the highest in the United States also. So that's the scenery here. In terms of obstetrician, of course, also because of the crisis, there's been a lot of fleeing of medical doctors in all areas of health, but also obstetricians. So we can say that maybe around 100 obstetricians take care of those 20,000 births. It's an access problem. When we talk about obstetric violence, we know that it's not only personal, it's violent, but it's a systemic problem, really, because how can 100 doctors take care of 19,000 births a year, So yeah, in terms of how open the system is to these type of birth workers, midwives, and doulas, I'm going to talk about doulas, and maybe Tamara can talk about the midwives. Since we are growing like midwives, when I started, there wasn't as many doulas, and every year, maybe 200, 300 women or people get certified as doulas. So we're more now. And since we are more, doctors and hospitals are getting more used to work with us. Some are super open, are super cool, and understand the benefit of having us in their team. But some are still hesitant about the work that we do. They don't even understand properly what a doula does. Sometimes I come to the hospital with a client and they ask me, how dilated she is. I'm sorry, doctor, I don't do clinical stuff. I can tell by her face, her contractions, her breathing. She might be in a labor or around this or around that, but they don't even understand our scope of practice. But yeah, they're more open now, and the restrictions on the pandemic have taken us back again, a couple of years back in terms of access and birth rights violations. But yeah, we hope that changes.
I agree that seeing an increase in doula and midwives in the past decade sounds very encouraging. And I'm sure it has made a huge difference in a lot of families. But there's so much more that needs to be done and that needs to change, especially in the mentality of those that hold power. Because there's a lot of power dynamics that happen in the birth scenario, not only in the birth scenario, from the moment they find out, like any woman or pregnant person, when they found out they have a positive pregnancy test and they're trying to explore what are their options moving forward. Midwifery and doula is not something that they immediately find out if they don't know about it. Some people find out very late and they are feeling discouraged of like, why didn't I know about this earlier on? So we're doing educating since the beginning is a very important piece of the puzzle right there. Midwifery care here, it's just very different to how it works in other states and territories, because one of the big differences is that the Department of Health still doesn't consider us healthcare workers because we're still not licensed here. We still don't have a regulation. Well, we don't have it right now. There used to be one. And then midwifery language was erased from that regulation. So it's been then like that for about,
since the 40s.
Since the 40s, which is kind of around the corner, the 100th anniversary, right?
Birth moved from the home and to the midwife care to the hospital. The midwife language in the health department of Puerto Rico was erased, and midwives were erased from the...
Like they literally tried to erase midwives.
But it hasn't stopped. The profession has continued.
Yeah.
How it works is that in order for people to access their labs and their ultrasounds, they also need medical care. But ideally, it could be a parallel work where the midwife and the doctor can discuss and communicate between each other. And that's how some of the midwives have been able to do it. I have been able to do that with some doctors, but it's only a handful of doctors that are open to this. There are some solutions that we're going to propose later on of how to change this. In Washington State, where I studied, or I grew up as a midwife, right? As a baby midwife, what I saw was very different because we were the primary care provider. Like as soon as the person found out they were pregnant, they could automatically choose an OB or a midwife. And if they chose a midwife, they still had three options: a midwife in the hospital, a midwife in a birth center, or a midwife at home. So there's a huge difference there. We are definitely needing to move forward because there's not a lot of understanding, and a lot of the aggressive comments towards the family that choose midwifery care and home birth come from providers that they don't have all the information. So there's a lot of misconceptions, especially if a misconception is held by the older OBs and they're teaching younger OBs and students. The information may be passed in ways that are not accurate. And then that just gives a lot of space to bias, and education can absolutely change that. And that's where we're going to move to.
So in order to have midwifery care, you have to have an OB who agrees to be providing the backup or the parallel care to order any lab tests to help you get an ultrasound, or if you need any medications during pregnancy or labor. So that kind of limits the midwives and the parents because there's very few doctors who will agree to do that. And then I imagine if a client needs to transfer to the hospital, which happens, will always be happening at some point, I imagine you face a difficult circumstance when you bring them to the hospital. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Especially because even though if we have a good communication with the doctor is also employed by the hospital. So there's also so much they can do. They're also oppressed by the system and the dynamics that are happening there, right? So even if a doctor knows, oh, I am transferring this client because she says she's tried all of the things, all of the comfort measures, and she's very ready for pain medication, or she wants to try something else. Like, even if it's not an emergency and it's just a stable mom that wants other option, if I tell the doctor and the doctor knows, but I arrive there and the doctor is not there yet, then how do I access the other personnel that are going to receive us if they don't even answer the phone? Let's just, it's like beginning from zero. And then the charting. Midwives here, we chart, and the same language, the same acronyms are used for charting, the same soap notes, and even like longer soap notes. And we have electronic charting. Some do paper charting, depending. But the thing is that is a very powerful tool that could be used for continuity of care and communication, because there's no space for thinking that we're transferring an unstable mom, or if we are transferring someone that needs immediate emergency process, let's just avoid the questions of how many pregnancies you've had in the past if what we're going for is like a continuous monitoring or something else, right? But it's a tool that many times is just not accepted. They don't want to read it. I think communication is just very powerful, and not being afraid. I have had sort of good experiences just advocating for families and standing strong and speaking my truths. No, this is my training. This is the charting. What email can I send it to? And then little by little, I see the layers of resistance opening up, but it takes time. And it really depends who's receiving us. And it still takes time away from the family. It shouldn't be like a battle, right? And a struggle. And it is a huge challenge that ultimately families are the ones that are affected, right?
Right. And they're the ones trying to escape a system that gives them a 50% chance of having a cesarean, and also a high likelihood of experiencing potential abuse during the birthing process. And then when they do need that extra medical help, these are the kinds of barriers they face. Can you talk a little bit about what impact colonization continues to have on families and birth workers in Puerto Rico?
Yes. Well, I would like to explain a little bit about our status, because not every person know where we stand. Puerto Rico, since 1917, well, we became a colony of the United States in 1898 after the Hispano-American War. We were prized from Spain to the United States. And in 1917, they gave Puerto Ricans U.S. citizenships. Every baby born in Puerto Rico became a U.S. citizen at the same time that our men were sent to the World War I for the United States Army. Colonization has limited the autonomy of our nation. Everything that we consume, about 85% that we consume in Puerto Rico, is imported from or through the United States. Sometimes, if it's an international product or service, paying double taxes because of this loss. And that's not even talking about the colonized mind. What Tamara was talking earlier about the power struggle and this mentality that you don't question authority, you have to be subjected to whatever is imposed, is a little bit intrinsic in our ways of being and acting and accepting and doing. So that's a little bit on what we are. We are a commonwealth of the United States, but what we really are is colony in the 21st century.
We are a democracy with a lot of dictatorship.
Exactly. As early as 2016, the U.S. Congress imposed a fiscal board to Puerto Rico. It's a board of 7 mostly white people that are not necessarily Puerto Ricans. They are not Puerto Ricans. I think maybe there's one Puerto Rican now. They were appointed to, it's by a law that it's called the Puerto Rico Oversight Management and Economic Stability Act. Promesa in Spanish. So it was established in 2016 as a financial oversight board in order to restructure our debt and expedited procedures for approving critical infrastructure projects in order to combat the Puerto Rican government debt crisis. But that imposition, first of all, that people that is governing us wasn't elected by Puerto Ricans, was imposed by the U.S. Congress. And it's going to be governing us until 2026. We still have our governor. We still have our House of Representatives, the Senate. But no matter what they say, if the junta says, no, this is not happening, they overrule it. This austerity plan has deeply cut into Puerto Rico's public service budget, including cuts to healthcare, pensions, and education in order to repay creditors. So that's super colonial. And we are seeing the impacts of it. This morning, I was telling Tamara, this morning, the cover of the main newspaper in Puerto Rico, El Nuevo Día, was exposing that there's a crisis with NICUs in Puerto Rico. I see neonatal intensive care unit. So in the last year, about 5 NICUs have closed in Puerto Rico. The health crisis is already here. We have the experience that when our clients give birth, they cannot find a pediatrician to see their babies as soon as they should be seen. It's really, colonialism is really affecting us in all aspects of our lives.
Right. Education, healthcare, work, what prices you pay for things, what control you have. And also it's worth mentioning that, it's supposedly democracy, but you have no representation in the U.S. Congress. So really no say.
And we cannot vote for the president either.
Right. You mentioned the effect on NICUs. And I know when we talked together in person, you talked about gentrification. Can you mention that a little bit?
Yes. A couple of years ago, there was a law that was created, a couple of laws created in order to incentivize American investment in Puerto Rico, where they offered investors to come to Puerto Rico, invest, and they didn't have to pay any taxes on any capital gain. So as you may imagine, a lot of rich investors come to Puerto Rico, buy land, buy property, establish Airbnbs, and Puerto Ricans have no access. There's a problem in terms of home access. I have a friend that her husband, and her 3 kids are living in a studio because they cannot find an affordable house. And it's a problem that is happening all over the island, in the coast where the beaches are, in the centers of the island, everywhere. So gentrification is a major problem. I was reading yesterday about medical tourism and how these companies are establishing like a medical concierge service where rich person can pay like a membership of, let's say, $5,000 a year, and this company will book you appointments without waiting. So me, that I'm a Puerto Rican with no economic access, if I need some, let's say, dermatologic care, I have to wait 5-6 months for an appointment. And that's in all services. That happens with us, especially for specialists. Yeah.
Even dental work,
whatever.
And it's also an environmental crisis. It amplifies the health issue, right? Mm-hmm. Because one of our environmental battles, is the access to our beaches, which is the access needs to be public according to the laws. But for the rich people and the rich investors, even the Department of Natural Resources are giving out permits because they can pay more for the permits, and they're able to build in the
fences and
even in the maritime zone, prohibiting the access to the locals and just creating other problems as well. There's many ways that colonialism is affecting us, and it's just a chain. a chain reaction that we just keep seeing it unfold in our eyes, because even if we're involved in birth work, we're also aware of everything else because, again, birth work is public health and it's also a lot of political work as well.
And you're also trying to live and raise your families.
Yes.
Exactly.
And and
Really the crisis.
the day and day,
The struggles.
yes, it's like, and there's a lot going on, and we can feel the heaviness. And it really, I think it hurts us a lot when we see how families are affected by all of, we feel frustration when we see a family that finally went through all the courses and education, but at the end of the day, weren't able to speak up at the hospital because all the years of colonialism have impacted them in such a way that they just have so many intersections that have oppressed them that it's just very hard. Being able to go in the hospitals with them as a second companion, it's very important because even the pandemic was used as an excuse to take this right away from the family.
Still used. Everything is open. Everything is
Right. Nobody's wearing masks. Yeah, it's open. Yeah. Except they're still limiting support in labor and delivery. And I also want to say I was really impacted by some videos from a journalist in Puerto Rico named Bianca Graulao.
Graulao.
Yeah. Some amazing videos about gentrification and just really on the ground reporting that's incredible. So I encourage people to check out her work, and we'll link to that in the show notes.
I was going to say that I think that one of the videos she did was about what is happening in Hawaii, and that's where we're going. That's where Puerto Rico is going. People cannot afford homes. People are living in tents. It's terrible. It's terrible.
What are some solutions you've tried to implement or the birth community has tried to implement that seem to be helping families?
Evidence-based first course.
That's one. Unfortunately, we cannot expect the government, nor the health department, nor the authorities that are obliged to take these matters into their hands. We cannot wait for them. It's been, in my experience, right? I've been doing this work for 13, 14 years, and it's so slow, the changes. And so when something tends to change, then the pandemic, everything goes backward. I think that the only hope right now that I can really trust is community work. And it's what have made a difference to some families. I am a general coordinator of a nonprofit organization that is called Caderamen, and it has a service program that is called Separe, which offer education and doula services, midwifery services, and naturopathic medicine services, social workers, mental health. We've seen, in comparison to the numbers that we were mentioning, outcomes in Puerto Rico. We see how these support and interdisciplinary services for families really make a difference in the health outcomes and in the experience of this family. I would say that more work from the ground. It's what's needed. We need to unite and see how from the community to the community we can support the families, because it seems it's not a priority of our government.
This is Tamara here. I wanted to add to that, absolutely community work. It's the way to go, and the force in which the community is putting the trust in, because they are feeling respected. They're feeling that they are being heard, right? And they're learning. Social media and that boom is also like a great tool that people from the younger generations, maybe they won't be reading like a very long article, but educational material that's very dynamic, they are very drawn to that, and it's easier to see themselves and like see, oh, these families from Puerto Rico are accessing this type of health, either home births, or either they could even see images of hospital births where they're able to move freely and they have support and like there's other things going on. So we're very visual. So that helps as well. And another thing that has been in conversation fairly recently is joining forces from different organizations and professionals and like putting the situation in the center, right? The problem at the center to see how we can just find solutions for all the different resources and perspectives. Moving towards integration or some sort of coalition just help us be stronger in the search of solutions could continue making a huge difference. All the midwives are just very clear that we're ready to create a Puerto Rico license of midwifery, and we're shaping up to how that would look. It could focus on the right of midwives to work in our scope of practice and how we have been trained and how we are valued in other parts of the world. But also it needs to be respecting the rights of the families to choose.
Right. Especially within the state.
Another thing is that old obstetricians their mindsets are different to change. So when we were talking to you in January here in Puerto Rico, we see that part of the solution is working with younger generations, with the doctors that are being formed right now. So that our hope, people that really want to make a difference in birth in Puerto Rico.
So groundwork from the community and growing the number of doulas and midwives and then finding unity are solutions you're working on. And you mentioned to me when we met in person that you saw some recent legislative success. I know you have doubts about the government, but what was the thing you were celebrating? Tell our listeners.
Okay, yes. 2 celebrations. First, in September 2000, well, it's nothing to celebrate really, but it's important that the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico made a ruling on a case of obstetric violence where a baby died. In a summary, this doctor induced a mother with 36 weeks because he was going on vacation on her due date. The baby, of course, was born premature with a lot of complications, and 12 days later, she died. So the family sued. The Supreme Court ruled that both the doctor and the hospital were responsible of the death of the baby. It's the first time that the Supreme Court or any legal authority talk about obstetric violence and put a name on it. Okay, in Latin America, some other countries have already legislation about obstetric violence. Here in Puerto Rico, there's a Senate Bill 454 that was proposed in June 2021. The Senate approved it, but still on the House to be approved. So we'll see what happens with that. It's important that this kind of behavior is named from the government, is named, and something is proposed in order to deal with this gender violence issue.
Okay, Tamara here. Another legislative success is that in February 2021, around that date, a little bit earlier, Senate bill was proposed to declare May 5th of every year, which is celebrated in every part of the world as the International Day of the Midwife. So what it was proposed is to declare a law in Puerto Rico that everyone, every sphere in the government, including the Department of Education and the Department of Health and everyone in the community, needs to know about Midwifery Day. So as recent as January of this year, and I think it was like a few days before you arrived, it was finally declared a law. So it kind of went through all the steps in the government to finally become a law. And although it's been known for decades by the World Health Organization and the United Nations, it's just very important that it's now a law here. And we believe that this will just open space to continue educating communities. And we hope that this law is just a step forward and a link so that midwifery care is finally recognized in Puerto Rico and reincorporated into the health services. And to celebrate this year, we already are planning an activity in a public plaza in Rio Grande, which is one of our municipalities. And yeah, that major just offered the plaza for free and is offering a lot of support so that we can just receive all the public and just talk about midwifery history and have artisans and have music and just make a public pueblo party.
Celebration, yeah.
A celebration, and just continue raising awareness.
And that was what I was thinking of when I was asking the question about celebration, obviously the obstetric violence ruling is very important, like you said.
Yeah, because maybe hospitals will be more aware of, they really have to do something about it. It's not only the doctor's fault. You have to have protocols, you have to supervise how things are worked, that you're following guidelines, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and the fact that they named, obstetric violence and talked about it, and then in a similar time span, also naming midwives as a solution and requiring education, basically to honor midwives is an important step towards hopefully moving forward. And I know you both are looking towards and working towards future legislation so that the midwives can practice with that. I know it's a difficult subject because in some places midwives don't necessarily want regulation, but if you're also not recognized as a legitimate provider, it makes it very hard for you to get resources, access, respect.
And it makes it harder for families too, because not everyone can afford a home birth.
Right. If you could be recognized as a healthcare provider, then there would be other ways for them to pay for your services as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What other goals do you have for the future or any projects coming up?
I would love this year that we can just go into hospitals and into universities and just talk to professionals, to already professionals in the birth setting and to professionals that are in just developing, right? The ones that are in uterus.
The baby professionals or healthcare workers.
Yes.
Yeah. So what were your plans? We talked about that in person. So what are you planning this year for that?
So we have reached out to people we know, other professionals we know that are either professors in universities. There's two professionals. One is a family doctor and the other one is a nurse. She's a nurse midwife, but she teaches specifically to general nursing students at a university. So they're knocking on their doors because they also have, the people they need to ask for that to happen. But absolutely finding out ways. And I was in Colombia last week and talking to traditional midwives and how they collaborate so beautifully with female OBs and the perinatal mental health professionals. And they created a curriculum that was presented to a university for continuing education. And I just fell in love with that idea. I just see it completely possible. And it may be a way of making it more structured and also incentivated
for their training. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Tania, what about you? What projects do you have in mind this year?
We were talking about this, about training professionals. Last February, Caderamen held a birth summit and here in Puerto Rico, and some of the speakers were from professors from medical students and the obstetric residency. So this doctor, after we were in the same panel, and after the presentation, she came to me and at least she told me that she's very interested in working together. So that's another entering path in order to access the medical school of the University of Puerto Rico, which is one of the most important medical schools in Puerto Rico. And we're hoping that we can arrange something with her so that we can get to the students and also to them. So that in terms of education and doing something inside the system. Personally, I guess, keep doing the work that we're doing and prevent burnout, because this is a very consuming work, the one that we do.
I wanted to add to that. Thank you for mentioning that. That's just very important while we continue feeling the stress in our body. But I wanted to add that in part of educating, I remember when I was a midwifery student, one of the thesis projects that I fell in love with came from a midwifery student that she used to be an EMT before becoming a midwife. When she was in that same state, in that same community where the university was. So it was very amazing to see how she just had an amazing relationship with EMTs. So she was able to put up a curriculum because she was able to talk to the EMTs and tell them and ask them, so when midwives call you for a transfer, what questions do you have? What do you like? The questions that they had was like, why do they ask us to put the mother in a certain position instead of this one? How does that affect what we know about resuscitating a newborn and like giving those first steps is this? How do you guys do it? With all of that conversation, a beautiful curriculum and a very powerful one was able to put out together. So after that, they were able to go to every EMT unit and just teach them about what happens when a midwife calls you in a birth center or in a home birth. What do we need? And that was very powerful because that was implemented a few years before I was finishing my program. And what I saw, and for midwives, it was like, oh, we're seeing the change. But I was completely impressed by this, that if we called 911 and EMTs arrived, it was a very humble moment of, what do you need from me? Right? It was like the specific questions so that it didn't become a battle. It was like, oh no, they wanted to help and they wanted to do exactly what we needed so that there wasn't any time lost in the moment. So here we need to do a lot of work because when we need a transfer for different reasons, simple things like what is the oxygen level that needs to be put becomes a fight, becomes a disagreement. And that is time sensitive. That is a matter of life, right? Or other skills that need to be performed, right? So I think that putting together a curriculum that also can just be brought up together and help EMTs and see them as part of the team and honor their skills, but like help them understand our perspectives and that we can understand their perspectives and their struggles as well could be very powerful.
I love how both of you have a passion for bringing people together. It's one thing I've seen in you. You work together, you hold each other up and support one another, and you bring other birth workers, and you have a passion for bringing students and EMTs and families and everybody working towards a common goal. So it's very beautiful.
Thank you.
There's no other way.
So how can people support and follow your work for our listeners who are impacted by your conversation?
Well, I wanted to invite listeners to check out Separir. We are in the different Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Separir, you can check us out and follow our work from the organization that I work with, because even though I still have my private clients, the organization takes most of my time, so I am mostly devoted to that. You can also follow the Asociación de Parteras of Puerto Rico. You want to tell more, Tamara?
Yes. We're going to send these links so that they're easier to link on. But yeah, the Midwifery Association of Puerto Rico, although I also have my private practice, this currently the president of the association, and it is a space that we're organizing to amplify the voices and the rights of the midwives and the families. We're going to be putting up a lot of updates in the next few months of how to support midwifery work and towards advancing the profession. This also includes that we need a lot of fundraising because there's going to be a lot of services that we're going to need to hire in order to do the work that needs to be done. So I would say just keep checking the pages so that you can find all the updates. And you could also email us at appr2021@gmail.com, English or Spanish.
And we will make sure to have all the links easy to click on, everything you send us that you want us to share. Tania and Tamara, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for everything that you're doing in Puerto Rico, and we honor and appreciate you both.
Thank you
so much for all the work you've also doing, because you've been paving a way for everyone in every part of the world, and that is very crucial and needed. Thank you.
We're doing it together. So
yes, absolutely.
Today's podcast was brought to you by the Evidence-Based Birth Professional Membership. The free articles and podcasts we provide to the public are supported by our professional membership program at Evidence-Based Birth. Our members are professionals in the childbirth field who are committed to being change agents in their community.